For joining this clinic today. My goal is to encourage you to think about going for your Master Builder Prototype Models AP certificate and to show how I did it. And given that I had tips from the masters on how to present an effective clinic in the last issue of the flyer, I hope I do a good job. Otherwise, I'll be very embarrassed. Now, I know the NMRA website says prototype models is the category many consider to be the most challenging. And it's a fact that it's one of the least achieved, especially in our division. To my knowledge, just 4 members have it at this time: Andrew Dodge, Bernard Kampinski, John Paganoni, and myself. Here's a view of mine. It's an aerial view. My effort to replicate the look of Woodsboro, Maryland's depot and adjacent structures, all in HO scale and on a 2x3 platform. It's just a diorama. It's not linked into any kind of a layout. Here are some views of the other guys. This is Andrew Dodge's Boreas Pass engine house. It's part of his prototype AP. And you can see from the archival photographs what he was working at, this very unique structure made out of stone. John Paganoni, this probably is a well-known model in the division. It's his Montville Station diorama. It's been dismantled, but John was very instrumental in encouraging me to do this, and his model is particularly attractive, I find. Bernard Kampinski, as we all know, is a well-known Civil War modeler, and this was part of his prototype AP. This was his bridge over Potomac Creek with the marvelous title, "Don't Jump." You can see the chap there on the right of the model, as well as in the prototype photo down below, standing on a board sticking out over that overhang. A bonus for this particular category of the AP program is that the motive power, the cars, and the structures you use can also qualify for the individual AP certificates in those areas. In fact, you may already have AP certificates in those categories, so you could potentially have all you need for the prototype certificate. And I think that's what Andrew and Bernie did. But there are other approaches, like the one I took. I decided to do this AP as a step towards getting to the cars AP and someday the motive power AP. So I want to take you through the process that I went through, but first, and we'll go over this again and again, the requirements for the prototype modeled AP. You have to have 4 different types of models: rolling stock, railroad structure, a caboose or passenger car, and motive power. Any 2 have to be scratch built, and the remainder have to be super detailed. So how did I get started? Well, it began with a visit to the Woodsboro, Maryland depot after my son Brian and his family bought a house just 100 yards away on the other side of the old mill, which is across the street from the depot. That's a picture of the house he bought in the upper right. And the old mill, which doesn't look like this in the model, you'll see why, is just across the tracks from the depot. Besides the depot, and this has been restored by the Woodsboro Historical Society, who were a great help to me. They gave me the plans, they had the archival photos, and they've been great supporters. This is the depot from one end of the tracks, the mill on the other side of the street. The track that exists there now is just a little bit left over from what it originally was. There were 2 main lines and a siding, what happened now is that the track beyond this view is owned by the Maryland Midland Railroad, which services a quarry which is about a mile away from, in the opposite direction of this photograph, to the far end of this photograph. If you go the other way, it goes down to Walkersville, where the Walkersville Tourist Railroad exists, but there's no through traffic on this track. Occasionally you see rail maintenance trucks parked there. The other building in the diorama here, we have the back of the depot in the left, the old mill across there, and then across the street is N.Z. Kramer's, which is the other important structure that went into my diorama. So there's a closer view of it. Kramer's has expanded from the original build, which you'll see shortly. So here's the inside of the Woodsboro diorama. That's my son on the left. Jay Wolf, who's the president of the Woodsboro Historical Society, in the center. And on the table in front I brought up a model of the Woodsboro station, which is the one in the back. The one in the front is an O-scale model that was done by the late Jerry Scheme from South Mountain, who I got to know pretty well. And we both showed up the same day on one of their open houses to display our models. So this is what Woodsboro Depot looked like in 1904. And the interesting thing to note here is there's a house immediately behind it that's no longer there, but I included it in the diorama. Up on the top here is N.Z. Kramer's, the hardware store that I mentioned before, and that's the way it looked in 1898, as I recall. And you'll note some of the characteristics, the stone pillars supporting the porch, the loading dock on the side, the old car with the rear brake wheel, and the buggies. And down below, this is the old mill, and this is the way it originally looked, not that monstrous red-clad aluminum siding building that now extends up to 4 stories. And you can see the Pennsylvania Railroad Union Line boxcar in the front of it. And you can see that is parked on the siding, and you can see the other 2 lines of track in front of it. And this was taken from the area of the depot. Now, one of the things that intrigued me in making this model were those milk cans that you can see on the platform of the depot, the things that look like milk cans. They were in fact fish cans, and you can see them in the upper one being loaded onto an RPO at Woodsboro Depot. Woodsboro, and this was another thing that got me fascinated about this, was in the early 20th century the leading producer of goldfish that were exported all around the United States. Had something to do with the mineral content of the water, which gave an especially golden hue to the fish. In my research for this, and I actually wrote about the goldfish business in an article in The Local some time back. But according to the Maryland Historic Trust, the Powell brothers family pioneered the goldfish industry in Woodsboro. And the Catoctin Banner newspaper reported they eventually had 45 acres of ponds and would ship over 120,000 goldfish a week from September through November. Other farmers joined in the goldfish rush, and by 1932, the Banner says production increased to 7 million goldfish on 500 to 600 acres. And the Frederick County goldfish farmers brought $1.5 million into the county. They organized a Goldfish Breeders Association of Frederick County in 1920 the year it was estimated that 80% of the goldfish in the United States came from Frederick County. One of the descendants of the original family was quoted in the Frederick newspaper several years ago that he remembers going to the train station and shipping the goldfish in cans. The unique design was they put ice up in the top compartment that would then melt slowly and drip in and oxygenize the water. By 1930, the business began to fail as farmers elsewhere in the United States got into the goldfish business, especially in the South, where they had a longer growing season. So here's a Sanborn Map. This is another key element if you can find them. This one was in 1922, so after the era that I modeled, but you can see the track pattern here. You can see the location of the depot, the mill, and Kramer's. I'll show them here in a little bit closer up picture. The red star is where that house behind the depot that was torn down by 1922 would have gone in that earlier era. So that's the layout that I wanted to model. But I also needed an engine and rolling stock. Now you saw some of the rolling stock in that earlier picture, the Union Line car. So for a locomotive, what was commonly used, and I talked to a railroad historian up in York, Pennsylvania, who knows a bit about the Frederick and Pennsylvania line that ran through Woodsboro. And they used commonly 440s on the route. So this is a typical one to look at. So having built the depot, I decided to make a full diorama of the area as it appeared in 1904, based on the archival photos and the Sanborn Map and the interviews I conducted. And so this might be a good place to go over again the requirements for the prototype model AP. At least 4 different types of models have to be represented: rolling stock, railroad structure, caboose or passenger car, or in this case RPO, something I cleared with Matt Thompson, and motive power. Any 2 of those 6 models have to be scratch built, and the remainder must be super detailed. The ground and all the natural features supposedly have to be displayed: rocks, trees, drainage ditches, embankments, streets, roads, whatever. The structures have to be prototypically set in place, and appearance. You're supposed to include, take into account the wall, backdrop, and illumination from whatever aspects you consider, from inside the railroad cars, the structures, signals, street lights, whatever. And you have to prepare an overall description in writing to document your evidence and your maps to verify the scene. And I'll give you a link later to the document that I prepared, and also to some articles that Andrew Dodge wrote about doing the prototype model AP. So I don't know, is this going backwards or forwards? All right, there's the, for the record, the NMRA requirement for this. 4 types of models. Every 2 have to be scratch built. And in my diorama, we had a total of 4 scratch built structures, including the railroad station, the mill, the hardware store, and one of the houses. And I had the 440, the RPO, and 2 freight cars, all of which were super detailed. And I had the landscaping that reflected the look of that area. I put lighting in some of the buildings. And since this is a diorama designed to be viewed from all sides, I basically built a portable backdrop out of blue photographic paper. And again, let me stress, I was very fortunate. I was able to find archival photos of the various components on the scene. So here are the models. This is the depot. It was originally built in 1883. It served as an active passenger stop until 1948. The state of Maryland bought it in 1982 and later sold about 20 miles of the branch to the Maryland Midland Railroad, which uses it to serve that quarry I mentioned. The station itself was last used in 1962. The Maryland Transit Administration sold it to the Woodsboro Historical Society in 1997, and the restoration was completed in 2018. So it's fairly new. And here's a look inside. You can see I put in the lighting at the ends, what do you call those? The hanging lights that stick out. Plus there's a light inside to illuminate both the freight area and the passenger area. And there was this unique light that appeared to be a lantern on a pole that you could see in in the original photograph. That was a very hard piece of equipment to find. But fortunately, I came upon something, was able to cut a little brass tube and feed a mini micro LED up into the lantern. The model itself was built, the siding out of Mount Albert board and batten siding with Tichy windows, and the roofing material came from Northeastern lumber. Kramer's was built in 1873 as a warehouse and was taken over by the Kramers themselves in 1890 as a hardware store. And there's that archival photo again at the bottom. Again, I used scribed styrene sheet for the walls and tissue windows. One of my favorite go-tos for curtain material or shade material is I take used coffee filters and put them up in the windows. One of the things that, and here you can see early construction with strip wood bracing on the inside. It was a lot of fun to build. Those stone pillars that held up the loading dock and the front porch, I cast out of Sculptamold. I put it in a piece of throwaway plastic, just poured it, and then I cut out little blocks and carved them and used them underneath. One of the things I really liked, if you look up in the historic photo, you'll see a birdhouse up in the eave of towards the top. And I sort of blew it up there on the right. So I decided I would try and duplicate it out of a couple of tiny pieces of strip wood that I drilled little holes in, and then I made a little paper roof out of it to try and represent it. The third major building is this Glade Valley Milling Company. This mill had been a town fixture since the late 19th century. It was started in another town and moved to Woodsboro to be closer to the railroad. And around 1904, it was taken over by the Glade Valley Milling Company, who years later, as I mentioned and you saw in the photos, expanded the original 2.5-story building to 4 stories. The mill stopped operations in the 1950s, and the building was later bought by a Woodsboro resident who uses it as a woodworking shop. And he happens to also be the guy who restored the house my son bought. And he also lives next door on the other side of it. So it was kind of nice. Again, for this one, I used styrene, scribe styrene for the siding, and tissue windows and doors. A little tricky, some of the cutting on this and building that little roof part. So in addition, there are these other structures. The building that no longer existed in 1922 is that house behind the depot that I scratch built. In the photograph of the Glade Valley Mill, there was a bit of a building seen behind it, and that's the one that I used down at the bottom, the shed behind the milling company kit. That was a kit from JL, Innovative Designs. And then across the street from the station, there was another house. Again, it's been modified over the years, so if you drove by it at present, it wouldn't look like this, but that was as close as I could get to it. It was another kit from American Bottle Builders as a section house. So then we come to rolling stock, and this is this was my first experience with building one of these highly detailed resin kits from Westerfield. And this was their Union Line Class XG class boxcar. And for the other car, I used a RD class reefer, modeled after the same 1896 type seen in the old photos I used in the project. These are ones that you have to put in the full undercarriage, brake gear, hand grabs, brake wheels, and so on. It was a great learning experience for me. And as I said, it later helped me when I started scratch building my own cars for the Cars AP project. And I certainly recommend it. They're challenging, often confusing, but they're very rewarding projects to work on. As I mentioned, you have to have a passenger car or a baggage car, or in this case, an RPO. And you saw in the archival photos that they were loading those fish cans into an RPO, which I've reproduced down there in the bottom. It was a terrible photograph, forgive me, and that's about as best I can get it for you. So what happened was I went online and found a LaBelle RPO Craftsman kit on eBay. And I modified it by filling in some of the windows to more closely reflect the model that was seen in the photograph. You can still see sort of the scratched out, the filled in windows in this picture. The gray items are parts of an RPO casting done by a company called Gold Rush Bay that somehow I stumbled upon. I had to cut it into parts to get it to fit inside the car. The LaBelle kit didn't come with much of a undercarriage brake system detail, so I added some of it. And then I added a chain uncoupling system after getting the diagram drawing from the American, from the Car Builder's Dictionary of 1895. The interior ended up looking like this. with the guy in the door, like in the original photograph, and the fellow up there sorting mail. Put little strips of paper down just to reflect letters being worked on. And I got bars for the windows from American scale models. I put prototype couplers on, or the supposedly scale couplers from Katie on all of these models. And this one had, I found a pair of very old Central Valley coach and baggage car trucks to run on this kit. The engine that I was able to find was an old Ken Kidder brass model. And I made some slight changes to it to become a Pennsylvania Railroad D10 class 440, like those made in Altoona. And this was the one that I had confirmation was used on the Harrisburg, the Frederick to Pennsylvania route. And you can see another version of it down below in the real archival photograph. The cab on this was had a cab interior, which is very nice, and all I really had to do was add the engineers. I had to remove the decal that was on the tender and replace it with a Pennsylvania decal, and I did some light weathering with pan pastels. And this thing, actually, it's not set up for DCC, but it does run, and I've enjoyed running it. So those are the components, and then I had to build the base for it, and I turned to the trusty solution of using foam insulation from Home Depot. And there's a piece of 1/2-inch plywood that I then set this 1-inch foam insulation on. And then I took additional foam insulation and shaped it to reflect the terrain. There was a slight rise going up behind the depot. And that's the material you see there. And so I then laid out where the track would go, where the structures would go. And then I marked out the road that I was going to have, and added some irregularities with small bits of scrap insulation. And then I painted it a base of let's see my note here. Right, I laid plaster cloth over the entire base and painted it brown, ready for the addition of the ground cover. And I then set microengineering code 83 flex track directly onto the base with caulk and added a thin layer of ballast. Various types of ground cover were added. Light colored gravel where appropriate for the paths and the road. I took an HO model wagon and ran it up and down the road to make tracks. I made some trees out of branches that I took from my yard, from small branches, inserted them into the base, and added Woodland Scenic's fine leaf foliage, some of which I actually planted directly into the ground, even though they come on very thin, fragile stems. I sprayed all of the trees with Tamiya olive drab paint to sort of dull their brightness and to give some variation to the coloring in the trees. So there's the roads and the wagons and the scratch marks that they left. And then it was a lot of fun adding details. Over at the depot, you can see I had some mail sacks, sacks of other stuff, and cartons, as well as the simulated fish cans. And over at Kramer's, the hardware store in the upper right, some boxes and other things. And over behind the boiler house of the Glade Valley Mill, I just put some scattered debris. As I mentioned before, I did a backdrop, which was sky blue photographer's paper, which I then added a couple of pieces of wood for stability. And I've been making clouds by just taking white spray paint. And I'll take a piece of cardboard and cut kind of a loose edged shape. And I just sort of hold it up to the backdrop and then just float the spray through it, kind of moving it around and moving the piece of cardboard to deflect it. And it gives a nice, I think, ethereal look to it. As I said, it was designed to be moved to any angle that you wanted to take a photograph from. And since I also then took this up to Woodsboro and displayed the full diorama, on the back side, I attached those photographs, the archival photographs that you can see here in the bottom photo, so that people could compare the model with the real photos. And here are some other close-up scenes. I believe the baggage carts were a two-pack from Tichy as well. And they're kind of very nice, easy to assemble. I think the wagon in this case was one that I don't see anymore from RS Laser. Some of the more recent wagons I've bought for my layout have come from Berkshire Valley models. They've done some great wagons if you're interested in old-time modeling. Lighting. I opted to install lighting that's controlled by a 3-volt watch battery. And there's this company, Evans Designs, markets these. And they're very handy to use for a display like this. You can stick your lights inside, or you can hang the lights on the outside, as I did on the mill and on the railroad station. The wiring is all inside, underneath the buildings, and it comes with a little push button that I tucked into bushes behind the buildings. And you just reach down and push them to turn on the lights. And as long as you don't leave them on, you don't have to change the batteries very often. So I put lighting in the mill, in Kramer's, in the depot, and in the house that's one of the two houses, which is not shown in this particular picture. I'm thinking about finding out if I can remove the individual 3-volt batteries and somehow link all of the lighting wiring into one control button. Apparently each of these Evans devices will power up to 10 individual lights. So if I can figure a way to disconnect the battery holders for each of these and then unite them all into a single one, or some other system, I may do that eventually. But no guarantees about that taking a top priority in my list of things to do. So here's a last look at Woodsboro and the diorama. So this is a basic violation of everything the masters said about how to present a clinic, and that is never put lots of writing on the screen at the same time. But I've decided it's worth going over these points. And I think Lee was mentioning he was interested in a plan. So, you know, find a scene you like. And it's obviously easier to do something contemporary than something old, because if you do go the old route, you need to look for a Sanborn insurance map and archival photos and do whatever research you can. And of course, always remember the basic requirements. 4 different types of models: rolling stock, railroad structure, caboose or passenger car, and motive power, and 2 of these have to be scratch built. Now, if this scene or its parts fit on your layout, fine. Otherwise, build a separate diorama. That's the route I took because the layout I have is a Nevada mining and logging operation in the late 1890s, so it doesn't quite suit. And then consider how you can use the things you built for other AP certificates. I already had my structures AP at the time I did this, but if you didn't, you could submit these structures that you built for this a project like this for evaluation. Same for the rolling stock, where you need to have 4 scratch-built cars, but you can also have 4 additional models that can be kits, but they have to be super detailed. I think I sent both these cars over to Matt's to be evaluated. It just proved part of the 8 cars that you need for it. And of course, motive power, well, I haven't done that yet, so I can't really speak to it. As I mentioned, I did a lengthy documentation for this because at the time I did the prototype AP, we were in strict COVID lockdown. So I submitted this to the judges, and they then evaluated my project on the basis of this document. And at some point I'll put the link that I've posted up there, because it'd be ridiculous to try and copy that. I'll put it in the chat area, so you can, perhaps if you're interested, you can copy it out of chat and then look it up if you're interested. And as I mentioned, Andrew Dodge did a 3-part series on the prototype model AP that's worth reviewing in the July, in 3 issues in 2020 of the Local, the Mideastern Region's newsletter. Well worth reviewing. To do this project, I had to thank a lot of people. Woodsboro Historical Society and its president, Jay Wolf. Big help. Rick Eiler, who is actually a railroad engineer, who has been also part of the restoration project for the Woodsboro Depot. Ivan France is the guy up in York who was the Frederick, Pennsylvania Railroad expert, knew a lot about motive power, rolling stock, and so on. And then, of course, my son Brian and his family, who live around the depot, and it's a joy to visit them every time and take a look over at the depot and see what's going on. Now, I'm going to open it up to questions, but I first want to show you a very short video of my layout before I start to tear it up and renovate it. I was going to have an open house last year, but COVID forced me to cancel it. So this is just a small substitute, and it comes at a time when the division itself is having some discussion about video layout tours, and we've only had one so far, and that was the great one that Todd Herman did early last year. This again was shot by my son, Brian, the guy who lives up in Woodsboro, who happens to be a professional videographer and video editor.
Hi, I'm Alex Belida, and this is the Eureka and South Pass Railroad.
It's a project I dreamed up as a teenager, but unfortunately it had to wait until 2017 for me to actually start building it. As you can see, it's a real modest layout. What can I say? That's all I could fit into this small 10 by 12 foot bedroom that used to be one of my children's bedrooms. And I opted for it because I have light from the outside versus building in a windowless basement. The ENSP is a fictional HO scale railroad located in Nevada in the late 1890s. It was built around two mines, one located at Parker's Peak and called the Parker's Peak Mine, and the other called the Flack Mine. The town of Eureka is home to the depot and its hotel, Adams Shipping and Storage, the bank and assay office, the Coombs Family Bakery, Milner's General Store, Lily's Pleasure Palace, Blacksmith Shop, Key's Chinese Laundry, Adams Miners Supply, the Post Office, Sheriff's Office, and the Eureka Gazette, because you've got to have a newspaper. The town also features the ENSP's small yard with its turntable, a repair and place building, an ash pit, and an inspection pit. Moving along, we have South Pass, a village above Eureka. It's home to the Lincoln Lumber Company, named after the illustrious President Abraham Lincoln. The inside of the sawmill is fully detailed. Among the layout's other features are Callum Creek, a narrow body of water running from the hills adjacent to the Parker's Peak Mine, and the statue honoring pioneers of the West, also near the creek. Now, because of the pandemic, I couldn't have the open house I originally scheduled for 2020, so this will have to take its place. Thanks very much for watching, and a special thanks to my son Brian, who's the videographer who took this short film. And by the way, this layout is in what used to be his bedroom, so thanks for that too. I hope you noticed those shots where he zoomed under the trestle bridge and through the cross braces on the engine house. He has a lens that reminds me of a shotgun microphone. It's sort of a long, narrow tube that he attaches to the end of the camera, and then he can just slide it through narrow gaps. And it makes for an interesting presentation. So that's my presentation, and I'd be delighted to take any questions you may have. I have to put that thing into the chat area if I can, so let me see if I can do that.